Hello, today the monarchy rings in the new year with a right royal debacle.
Buckingham Palace dismisses claims by a woman in the US that she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew when she was underage.
This was the news as it broke last Friday. Since then it's been splashed over most of the front pages, prompting a string of fervent denials from Buckingham Palace. What does it tell us about the way the palace now deals with the press? But first, the new year has seen two royal stories of a more negative kind than the baby pictures and ball gowns that we've grown used to of late. First, allegations have been reported that around 15 years ago, Prince Andrew had sex with a 17-year-old woman who claimed she was forced into it by American financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Claims the palace strenuously denies. The second involves a BBC documentary whose broadcast date has been delayed, while a number of issues, including use of archive footage, are resolved with the royal family. Well, that documentary, Reinventing the Royals, is written and presented by Steve Hewlett, the regular presenter of the media show. And as we're discussing it today, I'm taking the reins for this one. Well, earlier I spoke to Ingrid Seward, Editor-in-Chief of Majesty magazine, and Guardian columnist Roy Greenslade about the press coverage of Prince Andrew. But first I asked Peter Hunt, the BBC's royal correspondent, to give me a roundup of the story so far.
Well, this story first emerged on the website Politico, and when they published the story online, they tried to get some response from the palace to the allegation that Prince Andrew had slept with this woman when she was underage, and they quote saying that a spokesman for Prince Andrew did not return a phone message seeking comment. 2 days later, into the new year, the Guardian picked up on the story, and they had slightly more luck in that they did track down a palace spokesperson, but that person wasn't that forthcoming because they said the royal household would never comment on ongoing legal matters. Of course, within a few hours on that day, on the Friday, last Friday, several other news websites started picking up on it, and it became clear, I think, to people in the palace they had to say more, and so they issued the first denial, the first statement, and they said this relates to long-standing and ongoing civil proceedings in the United States to which the Duke of York is not a party. As such, we would not comment on the detail. However, for the avoidance of doubt, any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue. And I think on the Friday, the thinking and the hope clearly was within the palace that that would be it. But of course we moved to the Saturday, the Sunday newspapers, the Mail on Sunday. Now they had spoken to Virginia Roberts back in 2011. They told the palace they intended to name her in their paper. Initially the palace in the early evening gave the Mail on Sunday a statement in which they said, they repeated the first statement and they said, we do not intend to comment further. But I think what was going on in the background during all of this, not surprisingly, were endless conversations with Prince Andrew on his holiday, his interrupted holiday in Verbier, and he clearly told his officials he did want to say more. And so that was when, on the Saturday night, they put out the second statement, and that stated, it is emphatically denied that the Duke of York had any form of sexual contact or relationship with Virginia Roberts. The allegations made are false and without foundation. Two statements in 2 days. Now they're very keen to draw up the proverbial drawbridge, but of course that depends on what emerges or doesn't emerge in the coming days out of the States.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Ingrid, we haven't had very many really potentially damaging and negative royal stories like this since the 1990s when the Queen talked about her annus horribilis. Now, something that would not have happened in those previous scandals is that the palace have come out and emphatically denied these allegations. Does this show a change in its relationship with the media?
No, I think it probably shows that the younger members of the royal family realise the Buckingham Palace press office is actually working for them. The lawyers are paid a lot of money to work for them, and I can visualise Prince Andrew saying, I'm not going to stand for this. I want the palace to say something and not buckle down the hatches and pretend nothing's happening. So, they do work on the instruction of their employers. It is unusual, but the palace do make statements, and it's just what happens is the royal family seldom make statements. The Buckingham Palace do make statements now and then, but this is exceptional because they made one, then they made another, and it seemed like they weren't quite clear what they were doing when they made the first statement.
Roy, surely it is a little archaic now for Prince Andrew to maintain this dignified silence and have the statements coming out through a third party, the stiff upper lip and keeping stum and business as usual. In 2015, shouldn't he be out there defending himself to the press?
Well, I thought he could have made a personal statement, but to be honest with you, this story, every fact in this story emerged in 2007, and again the facts have not changed since. But I think it may be just simply the timing or the fact that this new filing had been made in the States that led to the story breaking once more, the same story, and on this occasion I feel that the palace probably felt that they could get away with a single statement and realised that the story had legs for some reason. I don't know why that should be. It's one of those silly season occasions on which there wasn't much about. And I suppose also when it first broke in 2007, it didn't have the force of being a legal document, and that's probably given more newspapers the opportunity to pile in. At that stage, I feel Prince Andrew could have come out and made a personal statement. It's such a categorical denial that I felt it would have sounded better coming from his lips.
Roy, as you say, there are very few facts available in this case, and yet it made a lot of front-page news. What do you think of the coverage?
Well, I think some of the coverage has wandered into areas where libel lawyers would be very interested indeed. A friend of mine at Thomson Reuters in the States has pointed out various little details which he says are not in the original filing, which I think are very dodgy indeed. And I think the newspapers during a feeding frenzy often step over the mark, and some of the material, especially, by the way, not just about Prince Andrew but about Ghislaine Maxwell, really suggests to me that unless the papers are absolutely sure of their facts, they could face action.
Having the palace come out and make these emphatic denials, does this have an impact on future stories for the royals? Are we going to expect to hear more from the palace?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, look, it is unprecedented that they've issued two statements about the same story, apart from the very fact that they've issued a statement at all. That is a good thing in a way, because they now can't say in the future, we do not comment on story X or story Y. They've now, as it were, opened the door themselves to making more public statements in future. And I think if I'm a journalist following a royal story in future, I'd say, hey, just a minute, you released a statement here on Prince Andrew. What about this case involving Prince William or Prince Harry? It's, you've set the precedent. Now let's hear from you.
Ingrid, are we seeing a shift in the way that the palace deals with the media?
Sadly, I don't think we are. I think that the palace really want to keep the media at arm's length. They're extremely friendly and nice, but basically the royal family have very little time for the media, and I don't think things will change.
Now, there is the other royal story this week involves the BBC documentary Reinventing the Royals. It was due to be shown on January the 4th. The BBC has now delayed the broadcast, saying that it is resolving a number of issues, including the use of archive material. Ingrid, what is the protocol here?
The legal protocol for using any archive material is incredibly complicated, and I think what you have to do, if you want to use it, you've got to clear it way before you get involved in making anything. And it's always been like that. It's always been very complicated. Even the use of a copyright on a photograph can be very complicated. They have to get permission, and it's also extremely expensive archive material.
Surely if you're making an investigative documentary, you're not going to know when you begin making that documentary what footage you may need in the end, where that story is going to take you.
Well, I think you do have to know. I think you can come into the BBC, I presume, and you go through all the archive and you pick out what you think you're going to want.
Roy, do you get the impression that if the palace had liked the idea of the documentary a little more, they might have been more likely to okay the footage that's necessary?
Oh, absolutely. The palace are not used to the idea of documentaries being made that are critical of them, and they control too much of this material. Can you imagine the American president trying to get away with telling the American media that they can't use film with him? This is really a kind of ancient privilege which the palace are exerting here. And it's really opened, I think, for public discussion, the rights that they hold over material, moving material, which is taken by the BBC or other broadcasters, and so this is actually quite a disgrace. But I think there's a second matter here we shouldn't overlook, and that is the palace's clear attempt to have time in order to ensure that they not only know what the material is, but give them time, as it were, to exert the possibility that they can comment on it. So this is really a press freedom matter, not a copyright matter, and it's about fair use of that material. If a documentary is being made, which is critical, for whatever reason it's being critical, then the BBC or any broadcaster should have the right to use it.
Well, we've spoken to the palace today. They've asked us to reflect a letter that was sent to the Daily Telegraph today by the Communications Secretary to the Prince of Wales, in which she says Clarence Hayes has not been cooperating with the makers of the proposed programme, has not been involved in the development, and Clarence Hayes has also neither blocked nor attempted to block the proposed programme. It says Clarence Hayes is solely interested in receiving assurances regarding fairness, accuracy and tone. Roy, the BBC itself has actually been criticised for not putting the documentary out on the 4th of January when it was scheduled. The press has criticised the BBC for that with some justification?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think one would need to know more intimate details about what actually happened. But if the BBC do usually run archived material past the palace, even though I believe they shouldn't do, but if they do, then it may be reasonable that they delayed it. My own hunch is that the BBC went too quickly to air with this, or tried to go to air with it, and that they should perhaps not have rushed to broadcast it.
Roy, overall, doesn't this give a huge amount of publicity to this royal documentary? And when it is aired, it may well get more ratings and almost certainly more press commentary than it would have done otherwise. I mean, if I'd made this documentary, I might be punching the air right now, thinking that there's an awful lot of publicity for it. And if I was the palace, I might be thinking I'd scored a bit of an own goal.
This is called the Streisand effect, the famous occasion on which Barbara Streisand asked that planes didn't fly over her house, and that only increased the number of people who wanted to see her house. And it happens all the time. When you try to ban something, it will excite more interest, and so this documentary is going to get a larger audience than it ever would have done in the first place.
Roy Greenslade and Ingrid Seward there.